My name is Paul Luna, and you're tuned into F&B Lunacy. I am here today with William Teasley, co-founder, brewer, the artist of Khonso or Khonso Brewery. William, talk to us about Khonso or Khonso Brewery. Where are you located? How old is the company?
For those who don't know the city behind me, I gotta remember which thumb goes up. Oh, this one. That's Atlanta, Atlanta, Georgia, in the U.S. And Khonso was founded by three friends that got very involved in homebrewing. And we used to have these tasting events under the name Brothers That Brew because the three of us are African American, and we went with that sort of connotation for us. And so after doing a lot of these tasting parties, many people encouraged us to sort of explore moving to the next step. We were very interested in that from the beginning because there are still so few African American owned brewing establishments in the US, in the world. So we decided, sort of early on to sort of approach it from a more business perspective. So Kevin Downing, who we lovingly call the Alchemist, and Corby Hanna, who we lovingly call the Aficionado, just sort of got into it and developed a real passion for the beer, but also an appreciation for the industry. And over the last 3 years, we've actually had product in that was available for people to purchase at a restaurant or a beer bar or a tap room. However, that was contract brewing, of which you just pay someone else to take your recipe and they make it. But this past year, we've really been focused on opening our own doors on the southwest side of Atlanta. We came together around beer and also this interest in making. And we, as a parent, Kev's a parent as well, we often talk about letting the ones coming behind us see people like us making products and working with their hands and creating something that isn't more virtual now with like technology and the internet. And that's another aspect of it that sort of got us really excited around the idea of being able to have a brewery where people can come in and see people like them actually making it. And it's really, really good. And they want to get more. And we can do that now. So part of getting your own space, as allow you have a little bit more control of your own destiny.
What was your first craft beer, and was it a hit?
Our first one that we did repeatedly was one called Standing Peachtree. So it's a pale ale that's actually brewed with peaches and cardamom.
In food pairing, what beers do you recommend with meat, and what beers do you recommend with fish or seafood?
Think of meat, there are the reds, the lambs, the beef. When we talk with people, we ask them what types of flavors do they like. And for the reds, we typically go with something more roasty, like a brown ale or a stout porter type beer that has a lot of body, but it brings a roastiness to the palate. For fish, probably I would say I would go along with something we call the saison, which is a beer brewed with yeast from Belgium or France. So it brings a certain sort of earthy spiciness without being too overbearing.
What is IPA beer? It's become very popular, and that name keeps on coming up. Is it something special?
It is beer's been around since we realized that if we leave some grain in a pot and rain gets in it, sits for a few days, it's a little alcoholic. So it goes, the earliest records are ancient Mesopotamia. So the goddess, they dedicate Ninkasi, one of the deities that they worshipped, was the goddess of beer. So it's been around. However, it wasn't until the Europeans were attempting to get to India that you began to see an addition of this herb called that we all lovingly call now hops. I can't remember its full scientific name, but it's closely related to it's a cannabisea. So it's part of the marijuana family, but without any THC. But they began to add that to the beer as a preservative so that it would last. Part of it was it would allow the beer to be stored and maintain its flavor longer. And also, as they were loading beer onto ships for journeys, they added it. It was an additive to help the beer last longer on those longer journeys. It added a bitterness to it. We also learned that it had some other health benefits that the sailors didn't quite recognize back in those days from having that become a part of their beer journey. But it was the India trade routes that brought about the India Pale Ale. So, or that's the stories we've been told in the beer community, that it was used as a preservative for the long ship journeys to the Indian continent.
How many beers are you currently producing?
3 that we do consistently. That's the Standing Peachtree. Another one is called Sweet Auburn. And another one that's coming up will be the Joyland. So those 3 are the ones that we're planning to be our flagships until they're not. So
what separates your beer from the rest?
I feel that in most breweries, there's a head brewer. There's one guy who's just responsible for the brewing, one guy or woman that's responsible for the brewing. With us, you're getting 2 because Kevin and I, we will create a recipe. I will create a recipe here at home, and then we'll end up in a discussion about it, and I'll modify it based on some things he brings. That happens when he and I talk. So we have a sort of that. Number one thing is we bring more of a collaborative spirit to it. So it isn't I'm right, you're wrong. This is the way I'm going to do it. It's going to be done that way. No, we've developed this working relationship of where we value what each sort of is offering. That doesn't mean we're going to change the whole thing, but that means, hey, I might take this in. He gave a recommendation a couple of weeks ago of adding something to a recipe, and I thought, you know what, that would be pretty good. So I did it, and it was like, oh, you get what, it's nice having someone you can bounce these things off of instead of just trying to come up with these things on your own. Number one. Number two is we are is that we also bring different approaches that really foster that collaboration. I'm a concept guy, so I will think of a name of a beer and I will deconstruct whatever I need to come up with the recipe for it. It's like, oh, I want to make this beer, in Huntsville with our collab partner and space. I started thinking about galaxy hops or different things that could go into it that sort of builds on this, this theme or concept. Whereas Kevin's more organic with finding ingredients at a farmer's market or visiting a farm and sort of tasting it and looking at it and all, taking a look at it from all different angles and saying, we may be able to use this. Let's try. He made a beer with Heather a few years back, and one of the most interesting things was we learned that Heather over time gets more potent in a liquid like beer. So the first time we had it, we were like, oh, well, this is nice and different. Eventually it overpowered the beer, but we don't know, so we experiment, and that's how we find things out. And the third thing is we call it we often tell people we're a step beyond our ordinary, and we don't there aren't many ingredients we shy away from as it relates to beer. We have a similar approach to how we prepare food. We believe the spice rack is full of ideas, and also share the belief that originally beer was brewed outside. It was left open outside for the wild yeast to come in and convert to sugars. But we cannot, we don't have this puritanistic belief where it was established, in Germany about, the three basic ingredients, and then they found out about yeast and they added one. People were adding whatever was local to their beer for flavor or for texture or for aroma. It's how we have always approached food. Beer is water in a pot. It's hard to, water, grain, corn, different cultures. There's the chicha, there's the corn based beer in Central and South America. You have similar maize based beer in Africa, rice based beer and parts of Asia and also parts of Africa. We use what was near us. So we kind of approach it that way from, we use cinnamon and allspice and as I brought up, cardamom, cumin. I'm playing around with garam because we're trying to figure out how to have something that brings some of the flavors of curry and other things to, and jalapenos and habaneros. And a lot of the really, beer itself is sort of a medium. I mean, it's water and, you start with water. So that's a medium in itself. And it's what you pull together and put in it. So we always try to give you something familiar in that taste, but take you somewhere else as well. So that's why we say the step beyond the ordinary. We don't try to blow the doors out with like, I've never had anything like this before. It's going to be like, oh man, all right. You took me to another place. And interestingly enough, we were in this competition and one of the people had said that with a tagline like a step beyond the ordinary, they were expecting something, just sort of off the page, so to speak, and what the flavors were going to be like. And also shortly thereafter, they said, "Oh, I really liked it because it was just enough. It was just a step beyond the thing." And a friend of mine was there. It's like, wait a second, you did it. I was like, yeah, that's how we kind of approach it. We're not, if we wanted to, there are people who enjoy sort of blowing the doors off the door. But with your palate, you can't really do that because people won't come back. They got to be ready,
It,
You got
it
to ease
sounds
them
like
into some new things sometimes.
it sounds like a daily black party with your beer.
It can be every no, it can be. Right now between Kev and I, we have 6, and they are all different. So we had people taste them. They're like, it's like I didn't get any of the others, sort of blended in. We don't just use one base sort of style and then uh, deviate or create derivatives from that base style. We each one we kind of sit in a room and come up. I was coming up with one a little earlier today. I was like, oh, I want to do one, and this is, as I said, I approach it from the concept of what can I add to it, and I'm going to a herbal market later today to pick up some ingredients for it. It's got like strawberry flowers and some other stuff. And the cool thing about flowers is like rose hips, they add a softness to a beer. They make it silky, and things like that. So
How long does it take to make a beer?
to brew a beer, and that's the first step in the process, takes between 4 to 6 hours. Um, you mash it, which is you add hot water to your grain or your base. It could be grain, corn, rice, sorghum, those types of things. And you let it at a certain temperature that allows the sugars to be released from the grain. So you end up with, the equivalent of sugar water based on whatever grain you have. And then you boil that for a period of time, typically an hour. You mash for typically an hour as well. But while it's boiling, that's when you add your hops and some of the other things that you may or may not want in your beer. Typically, a basic beers, you just add hops over that time. Um, and then you let it cool, and then you place it in a vessel to ferment. Now, the fermentation can take as few as 5 days, but as many as 3 weeks, depending upon the style of beer and your target alcohol by volume. So when you place it in the vessel, you add yeast. That yeast eats sugar and converts it to alcohol while giving off CO. But it converts that all the sugars that it's able to eat into alcohol. And alcohol by volume is based on the amount of liquid versus trace alcohol you can detect at those levels. So a beer can be as low as 3%. You'll see that with like some of your Italian style pilsners and lagers that are getting really popular now. And that doesn't make it bad. It just means you can drink a lot of them and not have the effects of some of your bigger beers, which are your Belgian styles, with a triple, a double, that are sometimes between 8 and 15% alcohol by volume. It doesn't sound like a lot, but wine is typically in the 18 to 24 range. So, and once you go past that, you're now in the liquor, so 25 plus. And so beer, for as much as beer is regulated, it's the least alcoholic of the big three. But it takes a good week to, it takes at least a week for your beer to be ready to drink. So It can take longer depending on how you package it, but in a week you should be able to drink it. And you can, oftentimes we taste throughout the process. So, you know, because you boil it, the water's clean, for lack of a better term, because in a lot of the more ancient cultures that had beer, it was a way to have more potable water. So because you had to heat it up in order to kill what was ever floating around in there. And so we still do that today. But your brew day is about 4 to 6 hours, and it takes at least a week for the beer to be ready after you pitch your yeast.
Is there a right way to drink beer?
One of the things we learned as we became a part of this subculture was that glassware matters. And so certain beer is recommended to be drank out of certain glasses because it adds to the full experience. This is another analogy with food. You taste with your eyes, you taste with your nose before you ever taste with your mouth. And beer is the same. People talk about beer in sort of the similar fashions. You can always get something and go chug it. But if you go to a beer establishment, whatever city you are, they'll have, the really good ones will have different styles of glasses that they'll serve the beer in because of the experience they want you to have. So there's a snifter style that sort of is curved and has the flowering lip. There's a Pilsner style that's a long, slender glass. So there's no right or wrong way to drink it. There could be ways that add to the experience by adding other elements that could heighten the experience. It depends on what you're there for. So I smell every beer. and then I look at it. Kevin looks at it first. I mean, he'll literally hold it up and sort of, look at the color, look at the head retention, things like that. I do that, and then he'll smell it. I smell it first, and then I'll look. But that's what the beer geeks do. For the regular people, I do encourage them to smell it because aromatics is a part of your how we experience and taste things. So I was like, give it a smell, and they look at me on. Then they smell it, goes like, oh, this smells pretty good. I was like, now taste it. And I go, oh wow. I was like, yeah, it's we encourage that. That's what I encourage. Just smell it. Get the same with it's similar to wine, but when we taste beer, we don't spit it out. So there's none of that.
Fill in the blank. Beer making is
fun. I enjoy it.
Is there anything of importance that you would like to share with us?
If you are passionate about something, go for it.
Do you consider yourself a lunatic?
Yeah. I consider myself a lunatic from the perspective of I see possibilities in so many different things.